and the impact on our budget is $400,000. So that is the kind of the evolution of Ryan White in a really short amount of time with no warning and very little explanation. And I really commend the whole team here at NVRC for figuring out how to make this work, starting with Bob, but also especially Carol, who is running this program and keeping our eye on the patients, which is the whole point of this, while we try to keep things going internally as well. So let me pause there, see if anybody has questions about that, because this is the context on which we go into the rest of the discussion.
Questions, Mr. Carrington?
Thank you. Well, what a decline from 3.1 million. So a couple of questions. So first of all, just for my identification, when we say that we dedicated some revenue from settlements with pharmaceuticals, etc., there was no contract that was stipulating that this money is owed to us. It was us saying that this is the source of money and we expected in good faith this money to flow. Or do we have any reason? I mean, you know, how do you secure this kind of funding when you get it?
So this is money that goes to the state, and the state can elect to use it for a variety of different health programs, and they do. So Ryan White's not the only thing the rebates are used for. When VDH learned that the companies would not be paying as much money as previously thought, they had to figure out what to cut, and one of the decisions they made was to cut Ryan White by $20 million. We don't really have any recourse with the original rebate funding because that relationship was not between NVRC and the pharmaceutical companies.
No MOUs with VDH.
Well, to the extent that there is a grant agreement, it's based on the funding that no longer exists. And so we, realistically, we can't hold VDH responsible for money they don't have. They physically don't have.
But I understand. The question is for me is for budgeting purposes is when I have a revenue source like that, I attach to that a higher risk factor, right? I say, look, okay, this is what's coming from there, but this is, I consider it risky A, B, or C.
I think we would have previously thought it less risky than our federal grants, and it turns out they're both very risky.
Yeah, I think it's my gist from what we've all gotten from. I think it's a good question. My gist from what we've gotten from Bob is that Lazaro, leading up to this, is that this was not something at all expected. We don't probably have a cause of action. This is money not appropriated. I guess the only value that I can add in that interchange is, I think folks have heard, but there are a couple of particularly key members of the legislature that Craig and Bob have already been in touch with to try and address this once we have a new governor and a new legislature. That does not mean that we would get the full amount back. It just means that I think the legislative route to address the appropriations issue we've done probably we're in as good a position as we can be at the moment. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay.
So it can be reshuffled and then maybe we can recover some part of what. Okay, but this is a maybe a high question mark. So the second thing is, what does it mean for the deliverables of the program? So for patients or people served, etc. That must be going down rapidly.
Yes, well, I mean, we have far fewer categories of services we can provide. And so the whole concept of the program to provide wraparound is like the wrapping is less around. If I don't know if Carol or Michelle have any other comments they want to add to that, but that's essentially the gist of it, that we can't do as much. We're doing it for the same number of patients, but not as much.
Correct. It's basically the services provided were severely decreased because of the defunding. And therefore, our recipients had to consider how many clients they could serve with that particular funding, that reduced funding. And so therefore, their efforts are correlated to that funding. So therefore, they had to decrease their efforts for
Gotcha. But sometimes, for example, a strategy is to say, okay, I cannot pay for the entirety of the rep.
So I may go to a jurisdiction and say, folks, we hit the bump here. We have a flat tire, literally. So can we share a little bit so that we keep the rep, but you provide part of that. So is that that an option?
Well, that's kind of where we're segueing into the next slide and the discussion of the strategic planning process. But the short answer is we do have to make some decisions about the future of this program, including different scenarios in which we continue to be the leader, but other people help provide additional services, or a scenario in which we have to shift the whole program to somebody else. Any other questions about Ryan White?
One thing I just thought of, so I know that we're gonna have lobbying efforts to try to restore some of the funding, but hopefully one of the things that we are not defunding is be able to track that viral suppression rate and how successful this program is. Because it would be a really good case to make of like, hey, you cut funding, look what happened to
Right.
these real 3,100 people.
Right.
And so hopefully
Wasn't there a number that
big-
we were at 93% viral
93 and
suppression
31
down in
statewide,
the
so-
60s?
No, the statewide average without necessarily being in a Ryan White program is 61, and we are at 93 for the Northern Virginia Ryan White program.
So that doesn't get to the question that you were
Right.
asking, but it is
Right.
inferential evidence that we're there. So maybe, I
I
don't
would
know.
like
if
to
we-
track it, I guess,
Yeah.
say like,
Yeah.
now you cut
And-
$2.4 million, like, let's see the efficacy of this program now.
Yeah.
So I think that would be pretty powerful
Yeah.
evidence to show. that
We
need
are
money.
actually seeing the effect already of the reduced services on illness. And so, yes, I think that's a very important part of the argument. And of course, these folks, to the degree that they do want to continue to seek the services, will be putting more pressure on all other providers to try to do that, and therefore on localities and on Medicaid and on other forms of payment. And plus, we used to have quite a number of service providers that we subcontracted this money to, and now we're down to 2. So all of those other ones that have lost that source of revenue for their nonprofit organization are finding it that much harder to keep the rest of their programs going in the same way that we've had to reshuffle our budget to deal with this loss of revenue for us. So there's also an effect on all of the other non-Ryan White services that the nonprofits are providing by virtue of losing this funding from us.
So I don't see any other hands, but just Mayor Hardy, just maybe we can circle Carol and Craig and I to try and answer the question as to whether that is data that we can track. Because some things I want and our staff is like, no, that's super expensive to track. But let's keep that as a follow-up, mindful that we have a lot of other pieces. This is a pretty substantive meeting, so we'll come back to you on that, because I think it's a reasonable question. Yes, onward, and let's go.
I just had another comment. We don't know what any additional reductions are going to be, but when you talk about the right box, when you said these are the things that are remaining that are still being supported by BDH, one of the things that I know is a focus is the medical case management and the non-medical case.
Mhm.
So there may be, but that it may look, yes, we're being supported now, but that may be, to what Letty is saying, the tracking of that. You probably need to
Yes.
focus on that as well.
Yeah, so for example, the case management means that we may be able to continue to be in contact with patients, but we can't pay for any of the things we're encouraging them to do,
Mhm.
on the left-hand side. So it's just a less robust case management
Mhm.
than it used to be, even if we can still keep doing it. All right, so that brings us to the top of the next slide, which is essentially to talk about some of the general risks and implications of that issue and the federal government shutdown. So VDH has told us that we should expect to receive 65% of the original funding amount for Ryan White in the last 3 months of the grant year, which are January, February, and March. They've not actually committed to that, and it is possible that we would not even get 65%. We might get a lower number. So that is a potential risk, because we've only had formal communication with them about the first 9 months of the year and not the last 3 months. If we do get further cuts, then we would have to continue to reassign staff in different ways, or even consider reductions. And then it would further call into question the long-term sustainability of the program. As a matter of the shutdown at the moment, the payments that we get from VDH can't be drawn down from the federal government to give to us during the shutdown. Fortunately, we don't have major payments that are affected at this moment. If the shutdown were to go too long, then we would get to the point where we were due another payment and we would not receive it, even if VDH wanted to give it to us. So that is a little bit of the risk scenario for Ryan White. Our military revenue has become an important source of funding, not only for all of the original reasons we were doing these intergovernmental service agreements to further our relationships with military installations in our region, to help them procure supplies, to help them get those orders at a lower cost to the federal taxpayer and therefore to the Northern Virginia taxpayer, to steer business towards Northern Virginia vendors when possible and appropriate, and generally to be supportive of what are essentially small towns in our region that have infrastructure needs and public works needs and transportation needs that we can assist with. However, since the Ryan White cuts, they've really become essential to keeping our budget balanced. And so the good news is that thanks to the work that Von Zell, who's with us, and Philip, who works with him, have done to get this program going and really ramp it up, we actually have more requests to fulfill orders for the military right now than we can even keep up with. And so you'll see shortly we're proposing a half-time position to go after more of that revenue and assist even further with those orders and make sure that we're tracking all of the very tedious procurement work that has to be done to keep this legal and auditable and all of that, make sure we're getting a good price on everything. So that's the good news. The bad news is, although the military has the appropriated money to reimburse us for the things they have ordered, they can't actually physically make the reimbursement if there's nobody allowed to go to work during the shutdown to do the reimbursement. So we have already purchased $300,000 of supplies in the current cycle for the military that they can't reimburse us for yet. And as a result, we can't further extend ourselves with cash that we're not getting reimbursed for in a timely manner, and we've just had to put a pause on any more IGSA orders. We have over $3 million of requests from the installations in the current fiscal year that we could go out and get quotes for and get actual orders from them for, but we can't responsibly do that when we already have $300,000 outstanding. So assuming the government reopens sometime by the middle of the fiscal year even, we should be able to get back on track and recover that pace. But worst case scenario, doomsday scenario, if the shutdown goes 6 months or something like that, we have to revisit the whole idea that we could obtain $300,000 some dollars of revenue from those $3 million of purchases. So that's a risk related to the shutdown. And I guess the saving grace is that we are matching this increase in revenue to increased expenses. And if we don't get the revenue, we just won't make the expenditures. So we will not add that half-time position if we don't get the revenue to pay for it. And we won't be worse off than when we started, but we won't be any better off. And we will get to the point eventually where we can no longer use that money to shore up Ryan White. So trying to be forward-thinking and transparent about the potential risks here, but they are, if the shutdown goes to the point that we're going to have so many other problems as well across all of our localities, which gets us to the third section of this slide. This is an example of the pressure that localities are under now, which I think is relevant to us, not only because we're all from these localities, but also because as NVRC asks for support from localities, this affects the reality of their budget situation, or your budget situation when we're asking for NVRC in your budget. So as you probably know, the SNAP benefits are going to end on October 31st if the government doesn't not only reopen, but also catch up on the administrative process that is almost too late at this point to really catch up on by November 1st. The state and the localities have to give data to the company that administers the electronic benefits card to tell them how much money to put on everybody's cards, and that process takes a week or so to go through. So we're getting to the point where it will be very difficult, even if the government were to reopen today or tomorrow, to get back on track with SNAP. The WIC program is just behind that. They'll run out in November. And so localities are scrambling to figure out how to backfill this need. Some localities are experimenting with gift cards or food banks or other ways of helping people with their food needs. Fortunately, at the moment, the other public assistance programs like Medicaid, child care assistance, and heating assistance have not been implicated by the shutdown. But again, it just kind of depends on how long it goes in some of those areas. And then finally, just today, Governor Youngkin declared a state of emergency regarding the SNAP situation in order to make emergency funds available from the state. And there was no real detail in the news release about how that would work or how much money that would be, but that is at least one thing that the state is looking into doing at that level. So I'll pause there in case there's any discussion about these risks or the shutdown implications in general.
Yeah, and I would just say, Arlington has had some initial discussions, and there's sort of two routes to go. There's individual, an attempt to try to reach individuals who are SNAP recipients, and then there's addressing hunger through food banks. And almost all of us are covered a lot by Capillary Food Bank. Arlington has also AFAC, Arlington Food Assistance Center. But you can imagine there's some concern on implementation for gift cards. If you think back to COVID, a lot of people tried to do gift cards. But that's at least where we are, is sort of a lean towards trying to provide additional resources to the food bank, Arlington Food Bank. But Capillary Food Bank's budget is immense there. And I used to lobby for Feeding America. They're a Feeding America member. Are there other thoughts about how people are doing things? I don't know Prince William or Fairfax, in addition to all our localities, if this has reached you yet, but the last 24 hours, I think it was today that a lot of us in Arlington got briefed on it, but yes.
Well, we know how much basically is at risk. It's about $10 million a month in Fairfax County, and we're in active discussions with our food providers.
That's a great summary. I didn't mean to force folks to reveal if they haven't figured it out. I wouldn't have known about this 24, 36 hours ago, but I certainly know that you got to load up the cards in order for folks to have the amount to spend. So I think Mayor Hardy also wanted to pause and make sure that we had space to sort of workshop this if folks have additional things, and you don't have to do it in this meeting, but thanks to hearing from Fairfax and mindful that for our towns and counties, this is a huge issue. So,
Chairman,
yeah,
very quickly, we do have a little bit, about a quarter of that amount we have set aside as part of our carryover budget. So, but obviously that only goes a few days.
yeah, we have some, yes, Mr. Chair.
So there is something that for me is important because it affects or it tells us something about our general preparedness as a region for abrupt fiscal events. All right. So I got a memo, or I got a verbal warning or a verbal flag from our county manager, just about the week, 3 days ago. And that was kind of, and we discussed, well, what's the region doing, what are your colleagues doing, etc. And what I saw was a picture of people running to figure out very difficult, logistics for a lot of people, literally last moment. Right? It's not that it was out of the realm that we will have a shutdown or something like that could happen. I mean, we just had a conversation about that. So I think that for this commission here is important to focus on, how we have the radar up, sensitive enough, identify risks, get the professionals to talk with each other, and have some, preparedness in at least the thinking, right? Because it's not so easy to jump in. I mean, in Arlington, we have, for example, stabilization fund. We put this money into a savings account basically for this reason. It's not a matter of money today. I mean, it couldn't be just after tomorrow. It is a matter of logistics. How do I reach these people? How do I mean, I cannot give them cards because they're not going to be reimbursed, and then they're not, et cetera, et cetera. So it takes an entire
restructuring of logistics at a relatively massive level. So it's really important to get the professionals to talk to each other and prepare for similar events in the future, right? Because this won't be the last one that happens.
Yeah, we do facilitate the human services officials from all of the localities working together, and I think that's very helpful in times like this. We can also do something similar to what we did during COVID and keeping communication going between all of the localities as this develops into a local crisis, in addition to the federal crisis. So I will check in with the CAOs, but I would certainly welcome any opportunity where we could be helpful to keep the localities in communication with each other around these.
I was about to say,
crises.
maybe it's time to resurrect mayors and chairs during this interim period,
Yeah.
kind of like we did during
Yeah.
COVID.
Sure.
Because I think it is a two-part problem, and I'm assuming that many of us, or most of us, set aside money that take care of some gap, to plug the gap. That doesn't last forever. But the how is detailed, and, we probably should share ideas on how we're doing it.
Okay, we'll follow up on that immediately.
Yeah, I agree with you, Letty, about, how to do it and reestablishing that phone call, that Zoom call that we were doing before. One of the things that through COVID, as Takis was saying, is we created our Human Services Alliance. And so that was a partnership between them and the Capital Area Food Bank. We also work with Fredericksburg as well when you talk about food insecurity and how we're going to supply. But I think just coming together and making sure, we've been here before with COVID, and now it's even more serious. But I think that we do need to have a hub where we can talk about it and create a platform where we can execute more robustly.
So let's
Reserve, but we've been here before, and so best practices are very important, as well as, the subject matter experts that Takis is
So let's exercise that, mayors and chairs. Let's convene once. The thought of 6 months, the entire major cities are going to convulse if we are 6 months. The longest was 25 days within the last decade that I know of. But I don't predict it'll go 6 months. But I also, this administration start is way different from 2017. So it's time to exercise the muscle and have a conversation. And we'll try and organize enough before that meeting such that we have some structure to it. This doesn't, in my view, lead us to be at a permanent activation just yet. But we got to exercise the muscle. So we'll do that and we'll follow up. I'm mindful, want to give space, but I'm also mindful that we got a lot left on our agenda. And I do continue to hope that we can all get back to not feel too overwhelmed by the pain of what we're talking about and get back to our families. But let's go on, and if at the end, if we have additional pieces, we can come back to that if that's okay with colleagues. Thank you. Go ahead.
Okay, so moving on to the next slide. This sort of finishes out the discussion about our current fiscal year. We started the fiscal year with a budgeted surplus or contingency of $132,000. This is just simply the difference between revenue and expenditures. It accounts for those sorts of things that come up in the middle of the year that are unexpected. And then at the end of the year, our policy is to put half of the audited surplus in the operating reserve. So we maintain the ability to deal with crises of our own. So that's the starting point for the math here. And then we are projecting to receive $309,000 of administrative fees from the military supply purchases above the $25,000 that we put in the budget. We were very conservative going into the year, and now we are well outpacing that, but for the shutdown. And so that's that number. That allows us to pay for a half-time position to continue to get that money, go after that money, and support the military. That's the $27,000 cost that we could actually begin starting in January. So in other words, we don't have to wait for the next fiscal year because the revenue from this program is already so strong in the current fiscal year. And this, again, if we don't get the revenue because of the shutdown, we won't hire that position. The next line is the impact of the Ryan White cuts in the current fiscal year that are over and above the amount that was already absorbed into the FY26 budget when we started the fiscal year. The next line is refers to the solid waste program manager who many of you knew, Debbie Spiliotopoulos, who retired last month, and we recognized her at this meeting. Her position was held vacant in the current year budget after her retirement so that we could see how things went with Ryan White and IGSA. And now that we have a sense of how they're going, we are able to fill that position. That's also a half-time position. There are two other employees who are splitting that work now in order to pay for that part of their time from the dedicated waste management funds, thereby relieving some pressure on the general fund that would help us with Ryan White if we needed it. But because of the IGSTA revenue, we're able to use that to shore up Ryan White. We can put those two people back to what they were doing before and fill the waste management position with a waste management subject matter expert starting January 1st. So that's what that line is. And then the next line is our desire to add support for our financial processes, our accounts payable and other administrative processes. We have a lot. This is a very, very complicated organization from a financial standpoint. We have so many different sources of revenue with so many different rules that have to be tracked in different ways. And it's just very difficult for our small staff to keep up with that. And adding that support will be very important to keeping us out of trouble and also to documenting our processes and modernizing our processes, many of which are very old. The next item is the strategic planning process that we'll talk about in more detail in a moment. This is the facilitation of a series of work sessions and a retreat and the other logistics that go along with those meetings. We have the opportunity to offset it with a $20,000 grant from the state, but just in case that doesn't come to pass, we've been erring on the side of caution with that dollar amount. And then finally, we have had a series of retirements at the end of this calendar year, some of which were anticipated, one of which we did not have a date certain, so it was not put in the budget. So we do have a pickup of some salary savings for one of the retirements, but we also have the payouts of annual leave that go along with the retirement of somebody who's worked here for a long time. So the net between the savings and the costs is a cost of $21,000. So when you subtract all of those expenses from the two lines at the top and you put half of the remaining surplus in reserve, which is our policy, then if we do all of these things, we would expect at the end of the year to have enough to carry over $115,000 to next year's budget. So this is, I would not say this is a stretch at all. It is what we expect will happen based on what we know today, with the big caveat of the shutdown. And because a lot of this depends on the IGSTA revenue, again, if we don't get that revenue, we just don't make the corresponding expenditures, and we're back where we started. $115,000 is a comfortable contingency for all of the things that could go wrong in an organization's year, but it's not enough money that we could do something completely new and different and launch a new program. So part of the story of this slide is essentially to say that we are in a good position to end this fiscal year, even being able to add a few new things to support our organization, but not to launch new programs or new initiatives. So we're strengthening the organization, but not necessarily picking up new activities. But going into any questions about that slide? So going into the next slide, this is just to give you a graphical picture of the revenue that's detailed in the budget document you have on paper and in your email. The first thing to notice here is that it appears that our 27 budget is just has dramatically more revenue than the previous years, which is technically true, but that revenue is the pass-through purchases that the military is making. So they are giving us up to $5 million in FY27 based on the orders that they project, but we are then giving that $5 million to the vendors that are providing those supplies. Our actual net revenue is the $500,000 administrative fee that would go along with $5 million of purchases. So we do have more revenue in that area on the net, but it's not to the extent that that bar makes it look like. And I don't want you to think that our organization is expanding by 50% with this budget proposal, it's really pass through, which is where most of our money goes. Most of our money goes, if you look on the next slide, to our contract services. That's the darker red in the middle of those three bars on the left. So most of our money is being used to pay people to provide the services to our localities, to our patients, and to do technical work around our programs. Back on the revenue slide, you'll also notice from here that our locality contributions are very consistent. There are not big changes in those contributions, but our state revenue is declining, and our other revenue is about the same, and then our military revenue is increasing significantly. We have miscellaneous revenue in that thin strip at the top that comes from a little bit of, thank you, a little bit of rent and things like that we can recover. But for the most part, it's in the larger areas you see there. So back on the expenditure slides on the next page, the right side shows you the expenditures by program. You'll see that even with the significant cuts in Ryan White and some other cuts, we are spending the bulk of our dollars in human services because those are our largest grants. We have the large Ryan White grant. We also have the large housing opportunities for persons with AIDS grant of $2.5 million that's passed through DC. And that accounts for the length of those bars. But at the same time, to go from that gray bar, which is 25, to the pink one, which is FY26, to the red one, which is FY27, you can see how that funding is going down and down, and therefore the expenditures are going down and down in human services. The other programs are much more consistent with each other. The two sort of standouts are obviously the IGSA, which has the corresponding expenditures to the revenue that I just described. And then at the bottom, the regional council services. I'll circle back to that with the strategic planning process, but those costs are within the regional council services category, which is why it looks like that is growing. So it takes us to the next slide, which is the strategic planning process. I think I've had the opportunity to speak with each of you individually about the idea here, which is simply to develop a clear strategic plan for not the region, but the commission, and to understand very clearly what the commission's role is in the services that we can provide and the benefits that we can provide to our member localities and to the region as a whole. That also includes developing a clear mission statement, vision statement, refreshing our branding to match all of the other outcomes of that process. And to do this, we would engage the Weldon Cooper Center for Public Service at UVA, which has a sort of specialty practice in this area of facilitating planning retreats and processes for governing bodies. They do this a lot. They've done this for many, many years. They have a great bench of facilitators that are experienced doing this. And in order to prepare for that final planning retreat, we would do 5 formal work sessions. These would be about 3 hours long to really dive into different subject areas where NVRC could play a role. The first one we would propose be on housing. And basically, if you triangulate all of the holidays and the other events and conflicts, we have zeroed in on November 14th from 9 to 12 as a potential time to do this. The idea is to spend 3 hours, not to solve housing, but to determine what NVRC's role could be in housing. Mostly affordable housing, but probably other areas like housing supply and other factors that go into the general housing issue in our region. And hopefully we would come out of that discussion with some actionable areas in which NVRC could play a role. Now, some of the ideas that will come out of these work sessions might be things we could act on immediately the day after the work session. Some of them might be things that would need to go in the FY27 budget to kick off or to accomplish. Others of them might not be feasible for us to do in the near term at all, but they represent goals that we would want to work towards. So there may be a role that we would want to play in the region and for all of our member localities that would take us 5 or 10 years to get to, but without knowing that goal, we would never be able to start down that path to get to it. So different potential areas that would come out of that. The first one is on housing. The other 4 are really up in the air. And I'll be back in touch if we launch this process to ask for more ideas about what the other work sessions would cover. I've heard a lot of suggestions around AI issues that could be a work session, aging issues and the implication on localities for an aging population, workforce, either workforce training and development, which those needs existed prior to the federal workforce changes, but now exacerbated by the federal workforce impacts themselves. So that's a possibility for one. There could be a lot of places to go. Now, these don't have to be the only 5 discussions we have about what NVRC could do to help. We could facilitate other less formal conversations, and a bunch of people can get together at a coffee shop and talk about what NVRC could do. But these would be the 5 where we'd have a professional paid facilitator. They would be publicly noticed as a commission meeting to account for the open discussion under FOIA, et cetera. So we kind of have to pick a finite number for that purpose. But to help bolster that input, Weldon Cooper also proposes to have one-on-one telephone or Zoom conversations with the CAO from each locality and from a commissioner from each locality. So there'd be another opportunity for a different kind of input and to cover some of the bases that might not be covered by the work sessions, and to account for people who can't make all of the work sessions. Then we'd have the retreat in May. And the idea is, in addition to the plan itself, that this would inform the FY27 final budget. It is just kind of the way that our timeline works, that I have to propose a preliminary FY27 budget tonight so that it represents a request to the localities to put that money in the locality budgets. And I certainly, thank you again. I certainly, hope that each of you would be an ambassador for that request with the colleagues on your governing bodies. But if we don't get that to your CAOs around now, then we can't really hope that it gets incorporated in the locality budgets. So this budget tonight represents essentially a request for local contributions, and to some degree, a maximum request, in somewhat of the same way that you advertise a maximum tax rate and then you come back and sort of true that up. Because we won't know until May what the adopted locality budgets are, it would be too late at that point to ask for anything new to implement the strategic initiatives that come out of this planning process. So let's say that we all get excited about doing something. We need to hire a consultant or an employee or do a study to kick that off. We wouldn't have any money to do that for a whole nother year. That's why we have a placeholder in this budget called strategic initiatives. It's $340,000 to account for some of that new work. And it would be shared on a per capita basis the way that the dues are shared. So the last slide is a very transparent table that shows your current locality dues based on population for FY27. So this is very slightly higher than the dues that you paid for this fiscal year because of population growth. Then the funds for the waste management program, which is a dedicated category of contribution. Some of the localities participate in the Occoquan program and some in the 4 Mile Run program. So those are listed there, along with additional contributions from the water authorities. And then most localities participate in our regional energy strategy. And so that is a column as well. So the third to last column on the right is the strategic initiatives breakdown. So the Alexandria's share of the $340,000 is $21,000, et cetera. This represents not really an actual amount of money right now, but the maximum amount of money that we would go back and flesh out in the June budget. And we're asking the CAOs and then the governing bodies as a whole to include this in your budgets so that we can act on the consensus that comes out of the strategic planning process. Now, by definition, whatever this money actually gets used for in the June budget will only be because we all agree that it's valuable to our member localities. If there's not value and we don't agree on what to do with it, then it just won't be in the June budget. The localities will never be billed for it. Those bills would be invoiced essentially around July 1st because we passed our budget in June. And then the additional money would be paid with your normal dues, unless it's a program that it was going to take a little while to ramp up. And so it may be that money could actually be paid later in FY27, but for the purpose of planning, that would be the bill that we would send you in July. So this is a multi-step process. It starts with tonight's adoption of this budget to serve as a request to localities to incorporate the money in the local budget, the proposed budgets in February, and then hopefully that carries through to the adopted budgets in May, and then comes back to us for the commission's adopted budget in June. So you'll see on the far right side, the total increase from FY26 to FY27, which is mostly the strategic initiatives share and a little bit from the population growth and the dues and the inflation and the other programs. At the bottom, you'll see that the per capita dues rate itself remains unchanged at 61%. So we're not asking for an increase in the base. The detail for all of this is included in the budget document that you have on paper and by email, and also the work plan that details the actual activities that would be undertaken with this money. You'll see that it is very, very consistent with last year, except for the things that we have discussed this evening. I think this budget is a good balance between accounting for risks and our current uncertainties, and yet still making plans for the future. We hope we will realize those plans. If we can't, worst case, we'll be back to the status quo as opposed to being further behind where we are today. So I think I've covered the highlights there, but Mr. Chair, please fill in if I left something out, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions.
That was thorough and important. There's some slides there with details, but we talked a little bit about this in executive committee, and I made time for at least one phone call, I think two, with Craig, which Teddy may have screamed a little bit in the background on, but because I thought that was important to understand. 3 bullets on process and the ask that's in this last slide. We have to adopt the budget and give notice to the chief administrative officers that there may be an increase. We are all facing in Arlington, without doubt, this is the most difficult budget that I will face. And next year I get to ask the voters if they'll give me more time to work for the people. But this is hard budgets for everybody. We have to adopt now. That's the first bullet. And if we don't adopt to ask this question on strategic initiatives, we definitely will not be doing the level of strategic initiative work that we want to do. Second, sometime in February, depending on your locality, usually your chief administrative officer puts forward their budget. Craig has talked with 9, I think, of the 10, or almost all the chief administrative officers. There's Fairfax, he needs to have a separate meeting over the coming week, but he has talked with everyone so that they are aware of this. And so that's a process that has started. Sometime in February, he will continue those dialogues. And if we need to at commission meetings, we'll have further conversations about this possibility. The dollar amounts are small for some folks. They're not small for others. But that's the sort of second bullet. First, we have to adopt. The second bullet is we're going to work on this process. And then, as he said, in June, if we come to a place where we say, this is not realistic, we are facing this economic contraction that is created in part by the federal administration, then that's not to say that we would continue with this process. We would be aware of what is happening. But that's, for those procedural reasons, that's why at least I'm comfortable in moving forward with where we are tonight. If you look at the agenda, there are 3 buckets of actions that we will take. You could argue that the strategic planning process is not mired in the budget discussion, and that resolution is in your packet. I don't think we have to make it contingent there. The second of our actions is the adoption of the preliminary budget and programs. That's the longer thing. That's the first part of your packet that that Craig and the team have to do. And then the third step is the adjustments that Craig has described in an earlier slide. I think it's slide 5 or 6 of how he has used ICSA, but also try to consolidate and use the positions in the best way possible. So that third slide, I think, is good management. in the shorter term. And I would hope that we could have alignment on that. I'm trying to give you 3 bullets because Mayor Hardy suggested it. I think it's a great way of thinking about it. I want to both have gone through the detail that Craig provided, but also sort of try to give you the big picture. And we have talked a long time. Open it up to everyone should you have questions. And you don't have to make them up, but if you do have questions, grill us, because you certainly do at your commission meetings and your council meetings. So are there questions about all of this in process? One question that I'll just say is, I did ask Craig, is the strategic planning one time or ongoing? And to be realistic, it has to be ongoing because, for example, housing, which Vice Chair Bailey did, I hope, raise your hand if you went to the housing session. I know individually a lot of you care, but that was a great session from what I heard. And thank you to you, Andrea, for leading it. But that housing work, say we decide we want to do housing supply work, and there's a niche that's not COG and that's not our localities, we would need the people to be able to do that work. I think probably all of us would say that low and moderate income home ownership is something we wish we would be doing more on, in addition to all the work for pure affordable housing. But it seems to me the responsible thing to say that this is an additional cost, at least that we have to think through, that would be ongoing, even though I think all of us in our budgets, one-time money is less of a problem, of course, than when you have an ongoing piece.
And if I could just add on that point, so my ask for the CAOs when I met with them was, as they put together their proposed budgets, to think about the challenges that they have in balancing those budgets and ways that NVRC may be able to help. So if there's something that they want to do, then why not pay for a fraction of the cost instead of the entire cost by shifting that to NVRC, where it makes sense to do that regionally and other localities have the same need or the same interest. So the share of the 340,000 that you have for your locality is also basically the share of the new initiative that you'd be paying, and therefore the rest of it that you wouldn't be paying. For whatever that thing is. And so when you look at this placeholder in the local budgets as potential savings to the locality, I think that becomes a different kind of feeling than to think of it as an additional cost for the locality. But in fairness, I can't say yet what the initiatives are, because that is the point of the planning process.
Which dovetails, since I don't see huge hands and since it's approaching 8:45, into the first of our action items, which is the resolution on the strategic planning process, which is sort of deep in your packet, but it doesn't include deep discussion of the budget pieces. It is, authorizing Craig to work through. It has some whereas recital clauses we used to call, and then therefore resolved clauses. But I will entertain a motion on the resolution for a strategic planning process.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Moved by Vice Chair Bailey and seconded by Commissioner Bodie. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none, it passes unanimously. Next, we go on to the preliminary budget. This is one where if you're a mayor or a chair, you hope that someone will bail you out and ask a question so that it's not just everybody approving, but I also don't need deep questions. I hope we've given a rationale that at least makes some sense to you as you're thinking about it. Are there any questions on starting the budget process now, with the caveat that we will have we'll have the checkpoints and be asking Craig to do the work over the next 6 months. And in June, we will not adopt that column that says strategic initiatives unless, we will have fulsome discussion, and we're mindful that if there's a deep, if we're talking a 3 or 4 month shutdown, then the country will be in a whole different place with no King's protests and everything else than it is at this moment. But that's the context and the tangibleness that I can give to the second item. Any questions? Yes.
So if I understand correctly, what we are asked to approve here is basically has the character of guidance, but a detailed guidance, because there is an entire narrative and a budget that is already proposed. So basically, we agree that this is our base budget that we start from, and we have then
More or less seems accurate to me, with the caveat that it is a little bit more concrete than guidance, because there's actual numbers and dollars. And I think that, you know, if you feel,
Preliminary budget, it says though.
Well, there's really no significant difference between the current year budget and this budget, except for the things we talked about tonight, the 3 halftime positions, and the sort of rebalancing of the Ryan White money and the IGSA money, and the 340,000 strategic initiatives placeholder. But otherwise, it's a very, very similar budget. I'd say the biggest difference that used to be dramatic and now it sort of pales in comparison is a 15% increase in our health insurance premiums, which most of you are probably facing as well. We have some other routine costs like employee raises or the annual leave payouts that we talked about. But generally speaking, it's not a very different budget except for the things we talked about tonight.
Yeah, okay, so this is really the base budget as a as a preliminary budget
Yes.
because it cannot be anything else, so, okay, understood. By the way, insurance premiums and pooling of,
Yes.
board personnel, an excellent place.
It's
for-
still on the list.
For the,
Still on the list. Yeah.
thank you, appreciate the health insurance premiums sticky detail that, and the rest of the budget, and we will hope that the government opens and Von Zell, please help us with IGSA money as much as you possibly can. So with that, I'll call for a vote on the preliminary budget. Is there a motion to approve?
oh, yeah, motion.
Second.
Mr. Karen Tonis moves, seconded by Vice Chair Bailey. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes unanimously. The last resolution is on the changes that Craig just described. It's authorization to fill an existing position and establish 2 new positions. This is the sort of thing as a relatively new, both in general with NVRC's history, but also as a new executive director, it's entirely appropriate to be this detailed. I believe it is necessary under the rules of the budget in addition. So I will move that resolution to fill an existing position and establish 2 new positions. Vice Chair Bailey has seconded most everything tonight. So all those in favor of that final resolution, please say aye. Any opposed? We now have, we're approaching 8:45 and I'm trying to get folks down 95, Prince William folks and everywhere else. We do also have an executive director's report. I want to reiterate my thanks to Vice Chair Bailey for helping with the housing. Over to you, Craig, for the executive director's report.
Thank you very much. First of all, due to the agenda, this occurs in the middle of the meeting, but thank you. I really appreciate all of the time that I've gotten to spend with each of you individually to talk through a lot of these issues and to hear your concerns. And I think the good news is that there were some very consistent themes that I was able to incorporate in everything we just talked about to try to respond to the concern about having a clear plan and a clear goal. Another thing I would say as part of this process that we can talk about is how to make the most of these commission meetings and your time in between these meetings. So there's almost like a meta discussion that can take place here about the role of the organization before it does any of the individual activities that we might also want to undertake. I also want to thank again very much all of the staff here at NVRC who did a lot of work to produce the material that went into this budget, and especially to Linda Tenney, without whom this budget would not exist and none of our budgets would exist. And to Gina Kesselman-Smith, who is on the line with us here on Zoom, who also does a lot of the work behind the scenes to make sure that a very, very complicated set of numbers actually adds up. So thank you to everybody who helped put the budget together. In terms of some of the other non-budget activities that we've been able to undertake since the last time we met, we had a very successful housing symposium on October 6th. Glad that many of you were able to attend, but we had 150 people there. It was a sold out crowd. And we had a lot of energy from the public sector and the private sector, from nonprofit organizations, housing advocates, realtors, builders, and lots of government officials and staff. The input that came out of that symposium is being summarized, and we will circulate that report, and it will form the input to the housing work session that we're holding on November 14th. And it's one of the reasons why we selected housing for that first work session, so that we could keep that momentum going. I want to give a particular kudos to Jill Kaneff and to Carol Huell who's here tonight I think Jill's on the line here with us, who put that whole event together. Really just heard nothing but compliments. And we also appreciate Vice Chair Bailey giving the opening address, which was a really substantive framing of what we would be talking about for the rest of the day. We got some pretty clear ideas that can serve as the starting point for this work session, such as the opportunity to facilitate discussion between localities around housing policies, around housing targets, around the length of the development approval process, around legislative priorities that we might want to go in on together as a region. And so I think this work session in particular will be very productive because it's got a lot of ideas right off the bat that we will frame going into it.
And that's November 14th, 9 to 12.
Yeah.
In the morning.
Yeah, which now, thanks to your vote on the resolution, we'll be adding to the commission calendar and we'll send out a formal invitation for all of you. Those work sessions, I forgot to mention, will include the NVRC staff and the locality staff that are applicable to these topics. You're welcome to bring your colleagues from your governing bodies, your aides, and we want it to be a really roll up your sleeves brainstorming session. As I think I've pretty much covered now, we did host 10 of our CAOs for a meeting here. This is another example of NVRC's role as a convener and a facilitator. Those CAO meetings are now back on track to be held every other month. The meeting in December will also include the legislative staff from each locality to talk about the General Assembly session. And in addition to talking about the issues of concern, to actually start talking about tactics that we could use to respond to those concerns and to strategize as a region about how to address the legislation. And then finally, I wanted to mention that tomorrow, our partnership with the Regional Elected Leaders Initiative at George Mason University is producing a webinar on local responses to growing heat and stormwater challenges. This is in the climate resilience series of webinars. And our own Nora Jackson, who's a resiliency planner here at NVRC, will be one of the panelists. These webinars are free. They're held from 12 to 1 o'clock. So we hope you'll tune in if you can. And I believe that is the last slide. So that takes us to the financial report, which you have in your packet. You'll notice in the lower left-hand corner, we are over budget by $99,430, but that is really a kind of a normal occurrence, and it's just because we've had 3 payrolls in the month instead of the normal 2. So this is an example where you can't just divide everything by 12, and that's what you can expect to happen in that month. Some months are different than others. We have those annual leave payouts I mentioned for 2 of the 4 retirements and some of the adjustments we've had to make for the other cuts that we talked about earlier tonight. So I would say this is a very normal deviation from the average, and that's really what it's a deviation from, is from 1/12 of the budget. And we expect that to wash out over the course of the year. Be happy to answer any questions about any of the items in my report or the financial report, but otherwise, I thank you very much for your work and your support this evening.
Thank you, Craig. Any questions on the executive director's report? I think that we are just like 8:46, so I'm not trying to keep us longer. I don't have a report. Let's go through the minutes. Is there a motion to adopt the minutes from September 2025? Moved by Commissioner Bodie and seconded by Commissioner Glass. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? I will not, I don't think I'm required to abstain. So I will also vote under the rules as I understand them. Anything to close our meeting? Mindful that it's pretty tough to be the person who slows us down. We did have some thoughts in the discussions about workshops and more time for discussions. I also hope, I'm very mindful that the quality of the thinking is what's going to keep you engaged in NVRC as we do this. So, and longer and filibustering at the end is not going to keep you here. Drive safe home. With that, we are adjourned.